I stood on my parents' front steps with 2 suitcases and a diaper bag. My 3 kids lined up behind me like ducklings, and I knocked on a door I'd walked through 1,000 times without ever needing to knock. They shut it in my face. My older brother snickered from somewhere behind him. My younger sister told me I was overreacting. I didn't say a word back. I just stood there in the porch light with my kids pressed close to me, and I made myself a quiet promise, 4 words. Just watch me now. This is what happened after. My name is Marisol, and 2 years ago on paper, my life looked completely fine. Not glamorous. A used SUV with a check engine light that never turned off no matter how many mechanics looked at it. A kitchen sink that dripped through 3 different washers, but fine. Stable. Ordinary in the best way ordinary can be. I had 3 kids who filled every silence in that house before it had a chance to settle. Devin was 8, careful and quiet, the kind of kid who color-coded his homework folder without being asked twice, who lined his shoes up by the door every night like a small soldier preparing for inspection. Priya was 5, a hurricane wearing sneakers, absolutely certain that with a right running start she could achieve actual flight off the living room couch. And baby Theo was 2, still soft and heavy in my arms at bedtime, still young enough to believe, with total and uncomplicated faith, that I could fix any problem in the entire world just by being his mother. And then there was my husband, Marcus, 12 years married, long enough that I had genuinely forgotten what my own opinions sounded like said out loud in a room, which is something nobody warns you about when you get married young. How a marriage can quietly erase you a little at a time, shave off a piece here, a piece there, until one morning you're standing in front of the bathroom mirror brushing your teeth, and you don't fully recognize the woman looking back at you. Marcus wasn't cruel. I want to be honest about that because cruel would have been easier to point at, easier to explain to people later. He was charming in public, warm at dinner parties, the guy other husbands liked. He was just absent in private, reliably, cheerfully unaccountable. He never raised his voice at me, not once in 12 years. He didn't need to. He had a gift, a specific and quiet gift, for making every problem in our house land back on my shoulders, gently, like it was just common sense that it should. The daycare pickup mix-up was because I hadn't communicated the schedule clearly enough. The overdrawn account was because I hadn't tracked the grocery spending carefully enough. Nothing was ever a fight. Everything was just, somehow, mine to have prevented. I worked mornings at a dental office doing billing and scheduling, a job I'd taken when Devin started kindergarten and never quite left, even as the kids multiplied and the job stayed part-time. The rest of my day belonged entirely to them. School runs in the SUV with the check engine light glowing accusingly on the dash. Packed lunches assembled at 6 in the morning, while coffee went cold on the counter. Spelling tests I quizzed Devin on during red lights. A rotating cast of pediatrician visits for ear infections and growth spurts, and the specific mysterious rashes that only ever seemed to appear on a Friday evening. Marcus worked in commercial equipment sales, which meant conferences in cities I never saw, client dinners that ran late, 3-day trips that kept quietly extending into 4 and 5. Somewhere in all that travel, in all those extended trips I never questioned because why would I question my own husband? He had made room in his life for someone else. I found out the unglamorous way. Not a tearful confession over dinner, not some dramatic scene where he sat me down and admitted everything with his head in his hands. Just a notification that popped up on a tablet he'd left open and unlocked on the kitchen counter while he showered. 4 lines of text from a name I didn't recognize. 4 lines, and 12 years of my life quietly cracked straight down the middle while I stood there in my own kitchen with a dish towel still in my hand. I'm not going to walk you through the weeks that came after that. Some of it isn't for strangers, and honestly some of it isn't even fully clear in my own memory. It blurs into a kind of gray fog of packed lunches made on autopilot and school pickups where I sat in the parking lot afterward and just breathed. What matters is that we tried briefly to patch it. He said all the right things because he always knew exactly which right things to say. He was sorry. It meant nothing. He'd end it. He loved us. He loved me. But something in me had already gone flat, the way a phone battery drains even when the screen looks fine. The words just didn't land the way they were supposed to anymore. By early spring, I had filed. What I did not expect, what genuinely blindsided me in a way the affair itself somehow hadn't, was my own family's reaction. I had grown up believing we were close. My parents, Diane and Walter, had been married 31 years. The kind of steady, reliable couple who never missed a single school play or piano recital, who sent birthday cards on time every single year without being reminded. My brother Kip was 30 years old and still lived in their basement, technically, between jobs, for what was going on 3 years running, a stretch of unemployment so long it had essentially become a lifestyle. My sister Renee was 26, newly married for all of 11 months, and had, in that time, apparently developed a complete and unshakable theory of what made marriages succeed or fail. I called my mother first because that's what you do, isn't it? You call your mother. I told her everything. What Marcus had done. That I was filing. That I didn't yet know what the house situation would look like, but that I needed some breathing room, just a few weeks. Maybe I could stay in the guest room with the kids while I got my footing. There was a pause on the line. The kind of pause that has an entire unspoken paragraph folded up inside it. Marisol, she finally said, slowly, like she was choosing each word with care. You know we don't really have the room for that right now. Here is what you should know about my parents' house, because it matters. It has 4 bedrooms. Kip occupied 1. 2 sat completely empty, permanently guest-ready, made up with matching towels reserved specifically for holiday visitors. There was a finished basement down there, too, with a pull-out couch and its own bathroom. A couch I had personally slept on every single Christmas Eve since I was 22 years old, because the holidays always ran too long to drive home safely. There was room. There was more than enough room for me and 3 small children. Mom, I have 3 kids. I just need a little time to figure things out. Divorce is a very serious decision, she said, and I could hear the practiced calm in her voice, the tone she used when she'd already made up her mind about something and was simply informing me of it. Marcus has a good job, a stable one. Marriages go through rough patches, Marisol. You two should really try harder before you blow the whole thing up over this. He had cheated. I had the message, still sitting there on a screen, still readable, still real. I wasn't confused about what had happened. I wasn't being impulsive or dramatic. And somehow, impossibly, I was the one being asked to reconsider my choices. I drove over to their house the next morning anyway, because I genuinely believed that hearing it over the phone was different from seeing my face, seeing the kids, seeing what we actually needed. I walked up the same porch steps I had run up 1,000 times as a kid, past the same chipped railing my father kept meaning to repaint, and I knocked on the door of the house I grew up in. My father opened it, and something about his expression was already rehearsed, already arranged into place, like he and my mother had sat at the kitchen table the night before and scripted this exact moment together, complete with pauses. We talked about it, he said, before I'd even said hello. Your mother and we don't think it's a good idea for you to stay here right now. Dad. My voice came out thinner than I wanted it to, smaller than I meant it to sound. I have nowhere else to go tonight. I have 3 kids in the car. The house situation will sort itself out eventually, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. These things take time with lawyers. You could still go back to him, you know. Try to work it out properly, the way people used to. Devin was standing just behind me on the top step, silent, 8 years old, absorbing every word of this in the particular quiet way he absorbed everything. I felt his small hand find mine and grip it, hard, harder than an 8-year-old's hand should be able to grip. I'm not going back to him, I said. I'm asking my parents for help. That's all this is. He looked at me for a long moment. Then his eyes moved past me, to the kids waiting behind me on the steps, to the SUV in the driveway with 3 car seats visible through the window. Then he stepped back slightly and started to close the door. I'm sorry, Mari. We just can't do it right now. That's when Kip appeared in the gap behind him, 30 years old, having lived rent-free under that roof for the better part of a decade, wearing a half-smile like this whole scene was mildly, privately amusing to him. Yeah, there's really no space, sis. You get it, right? He had an entire wing of that house essentially to himself. A gaming setup that took up half of what used to be the dining room. A bedroom he'd occupied since he was 17. I stood on that porch and I did not cry, even though it was right there, pressing hot against the back of my throat, even though every part of my body wanted to sit down on those familiar steps and simply come apart. But Devin was holding my hand so tightly, it almost hurt, and Priya had wrapped both arms around my leg and buried her face against my hip. And Theo, barely 2 years old, had somehow picked up on the tension in the air the way small children always do, and had gone very still and very quiet against my shoulder. I was not going to fall apart in front of them. Not there. Not on that porch. Okay, I said. Just that single word. Then Renee appeared in the hallway behind them. Of course she did. Arms already crossed over her chest, head already tilted at that particular angle she uses right before she says something she's decided, in her infinite 26-year-old wisdom, is helpful. Honestly, Mari, I just think this whole thing is a little rash. Marcus isn't some monster. People make mistakes, everyone knows that. You have 3 kids to think about, their stability should really come before your feelings right now. Their stability. As though I hadn't been the one constructing that stability, brick by brick, appointment by appointment, for the entirety of their lives. As though every fever at 3 a.m., every school project finished at midnight, every scraped knee and nightmare and first day of school hadn't been mine alone to hold together while Marcus was on a plane somewhere. Thank you for your input, I said, and my voice came out completely even, completely flat, which surprised even me. Renee just shrugged, the way you shrug at someone being unreasonably difficult about something perfectly simple. I picked up my 2 suitcases from where I'd set them on the porch. I walked my 3 children back down the steps I used to run up as a girl. I buckled all 3 of them into an SUV with a check engine light that had never once turned off in 3 years. And I drove away from the house I grew up in, watching it shrink in the rearview mirror until it disappeared behind the curve of the road. We spent that first night in a roadside motel 40 minutes outside of town, because it was cheap, and it was far enough that I didn't have to think about whose front door I might end up in front of next. It cost more than I wanted to spend, but it had 2 beds and it was clean, and the kids, bless them, thought the whole thing was some kind of adventure. Devin helped me get Theo settled into the portable crib I kept folded in the trunk for emergencies. Priya announced with total confidence that she would be sleeping in the middle of the big bed because she was, in her words, the boss of this trip. I let them have that. I let them have every small joy they could find in a night that, for me, felt like the floor had genuinely dropped out from under my entire life. I cried for the first time in weeks that night, quietly, after all 3 of them had finally fallen asleep. Small, exhausted, silent tears into a motel pillow that smelled faintly of bleach. And then, because there was nothing else to do, I made myself lie there and count what I still had instead of what I'd just lost. A part-time job that could probably become full-time if I pushed for it. A decent work history behind me. A lawyer who'd agreed, kindly, to let me pay her in installments. 3 healthy, whole children currently sleeping in a pile like puppies just a few feet away. And a promise, whispered to nobody but myself, standing on a porch that used to be mine. Just watch me now. I'm going to skip past most of the hardest stretch, not because it wasn't real, but because this story was never really about how bad things got. It got bad. There were weeks in that motel that stretched, slowly and unwillingly, into a full month. There were nights I fed the kids cereal for dinner because the last of the cash that week had gone toward a pair of new shoes for Theo, whose feet had grown right out of his old ones seemingly overnight. There were nights, after they were all finally asleep, when I sat on the closed lid of the motel toilet with the fan running so they wouldn't hear me, and let myself feel the entire weight of what had happened, all of it, at once. And then I got up. I washed my face in the sink. And I went back out and became their mother again, because that job doesn't pause for grief, no matter how badly you need it to. This telling you about is what got built instead. My supervisor at the dental office, a woman named Odette, blunt, sharp-eyed, unexpectedly generous underneath a fairly no-nonsense exterior, noticed that I'd started coming in early and staying late, using the front desk computer after hours to search apartment listings when I thought no one was watching. She asked me straight out one slow Tuesday afternoon whether things were hard at home. I told her the truth, or most of it. She didn't offer me pity, which I appreciated more than I could say at the time. She offered me a full-time position with benefits, right there on the spot, effective immediately. I said yes before she'd even fully finished the sentence. With that, I found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a modest, safe neighborhood, close enough to the kids' school that Devin could eventually walk with a friend's older sibling, near a bus line that ran right past Theo's new daycare. It was small, one kitchen drawer that actually slid open smoothly, bathroom tile in a shade of beige that no decade in recorded history has ever proudly claimed. But it was entirely, completely ours. Priya picked out curtains for the living room window, an aggressively bright, almost obnoxious orange, and the first evening we hung them up, I stood back in the middle of that half-empty living room and thought, quietly, okay, this is actually going to be all right. The divorce itself dragged on for 9 long months. Marcus had the sharper lawyer at the start, and he used every bit of that advantage, pushing hard for a custody arrangement that was, to put it generously, wildly optimistic about how present and involved he actually intended to be going forward. But here is the thing nobody tells you about parents who haven't done the daily, invisible work of raising a child. They don't have the paper trail to back up their claims. I had 9 years of being the one who filled out every school form. 9 years of pediatrician logs with my signature on them. 9 years of daycare sign-in sheets, every single one in my handwriting. My attorney was thorough, methodical, and quietly relentless. The custody evaluation that followed was not kind to Marcus's version of events. I was awarded primary physical custody. He received alternating weekends and a few weeks each summer. He also owed 9 months of retroactive child support, which his new legal team tried, quite creatively and quite unsuccessfully, to negotiate down. My family found out about the final settlement the way news travels in a town too small to keep secrets, through the grapevine, before I'd said a single word to any of them myself. My mother called me shortly after. It was the first time she'd called since the night I originally told her about the divorce. "We're just so relieved it all worked out," she said, in a tone that suggested she'd been quietly rooting for me from some comfortable distance this entire time. "Were you?" I asked her. She shifted, almost immediately, into the particular mode she reaches for whenever she feels cornered. A soft sigh. A gentle suggestion that I was perhaps being oversensitive about the whole thing. A reminder that families go through hard seasons, and that we all just needed to move forward together as a unit. I let her finish talking. I didn't argue with a single word of it. When she was done, I simply told her that I needed more time, and that I would reach out when I was ready. I have not rushed that particular timeline, not once, not even a little. Renee reached out about 4 months after the settlement, once I'd gotten the kids fully settled into the new apartment, and something resembling a routine had started to take shape. She sent a long message, paragraphs, actually, several of them, about how she'd been doing a lot of reflecting, and how she hoped we could reconnect, and how she recognized now that some of what she'd said on that porch had come out wrong, and how she hoped I could understand where she'd been coming from at the time. I read it twice. I thought, both times, about that particular tilt of her head, about their stability should come before your feelings. I wrote back something short and not unkind. I told her I appreciated the message, that I needed more time still, and that I would reach out when I was ready. She has not stopped trying since. Messages every few weeks, gradually more thoughtful, gradually more aware of what she'd actually said that day. I read every single one. I'm still taking my time. Kip has never reached out at all, not once in 2 full years, which, in its own way, is an answer too. My father sent a holiday card the following December. Inside, in his own handwriting, just 2 words, "Thinking of you." I put it up on our refrigerator because it was in his handwriting, and because my kids like seeing something from their grandfather even now, and because that small gesture felt, somehow, separate from everything else that had happened on that porch. 5 months after the settlement, Odette recommended me for a team lead position that had opened up. The raise that came with it wasn't life-changing money by any stretch, but it made me sit down for a moment when I actually saw the number on the offer letter. Not because it was extraordinary. It wasn't. But because it was entirely mine, earned, documented, nobody's charity, nobody's grace, no strings attached to anyone else's approval. I upgraded us into a 3-bedroom apartment in the same school district. Slightly newer, bathroom tile in a color that has never at any point in history been fashionable. But at least every single drawer in the kitchen opened smoothly on the first try. Priya got her very own room and immediately, gleefully, covered one entire wall in chalkboard paint, filling it top to bottom with horses that were, by her own insistence, entirely recognizable as horses, despite considerable evidence to the contrary. Devon, who had gone quiet and watchful through most of the previous 2 years, came and leaned against the kitchen counter one evening while I was cooking, watched me stir a pot for a long moment, and then said, "Mom, I think we're actually going to be okay." He was 9 years old by then. "Yeah," I told him. "I think so too." There is a specific, quiet kind of justice that never announces itself with a dramatic confrontation. It doesn't hand you the satisfying moment where you get to watch someone's face fall as they finally understand they were wrong about you. It's much quieter than that. It arrives in small increments, over months, over years. It's a lease with only your own name printed on it. It's a savings account balance that keeps climbing a little more every month. It's 3 kids falling asleep in their own beds, in their own rooms, in a home you built up entirely from nothing, who wake up the next morning and ask for pancakes with absolutely no idea how much it cost their mother to get them there. Which is exactly, precisely, how it's supposed to be. Marcus moved in with a woman from those 4 lines of text. That lasted about a year, from what I've heard secondhand. He's currently renting a 1-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. He takes the kids on his scheduled weekends, and to give credit where it's due, he does actually show up for them now. We communicate strictly by text, strictly about logistics, pickup times, school events, the occasional dentist appointment. It's efficient. It works. I've stopped waiting for an apology from my parents or from my siblings. Not because I've decided they don't owe me one, they absolutely do, but because I learned something over these past 2 years that nobody ever bothered to tell me beforehand. Waiting around for an apology is just a quieter, more patient form of staying stuck exactly where you were hurt. And I am no longer interested in staying anywhere I once had to beg to be let into. Last month, Devon's school held a family showcase. One of those events where kids present projects on folding tables and parents wander the gym holding paper cups of genuinely terrible coffee. I went, obviously. I always go, to every single one, no matter what it takes to rearrange my schedule. Devon's project was on resilience. He'd actually researched it properly for weeks, the psychology of it, what separates people who eventually rebuild from people who stay buried under what happened to them. He'd made a full display board, hand-lettered the title himself at the top, done the entire thing without asking for help. At the very bottom, in smaller handwriting, he had written, "People who bounce back don't wait around to be saved. They just figure out the next move." He was standing beside it when I walked up, watching me read it with that same careful, measured expression he's had since he was small. "I wrote that part myself," he said, "not from a source or anything." I looked at him for a long moment. 9 years old and already understanding something that took his own mother 30-some years to fully learn. "It's really good," I told him. He nodded, entirely satisfied with himself. "I know. I'm not telling you any of this because I want your sympathy. I don't need it, and honestly, I don't want it. I've got a kitchen sink that doesn't drip, a team lead title with my name on the door, and 3 kids who are loud and specific and completely, unapologetically themselves. And I am doing just fine. I'm telling it because I know there are women out there right now, standing on some version of that exact porch, holding the weight of kids and bags and shattered trust, asking for help from people who are supposed to love them unconditionally, and watching that door start to close anyway. It feels like the end of something when that happens. I promise you, it isn't. It's the beginning. The people who closed that door on me are still living, right now, the exact same lives they were living 2 years ago. Same house, same routines, same everything, unchanged, unmoved. While I built something entirely new out of a motel room, 2 suitcases, and 4 words whispered to no one but myself on a porch in the dark. There is no sweeter outcome than that. None at all. If someone ever told you there was no room for you, What did you do with that? Tell me in the comments below. Because I believe this community already understands something that took me far too long to learn for myself. The people who insist there's no space for you are usually just quietly afraid of exactly who you'll become once you finally go and find your own.